Welcome into the Late Night Gamecock Show. My name is Matt Anderson, and joining me, as always, is Alex Jones of thebigspur.com. Alex, how you doing?
Doing good. Good to be back with everybody here on this Wednesday night.
Yeah, it's Wednesday, April 30th, 2025, the last day of April. I am so excited for summertime. Spring is fun, but now the spring football is over. It's kind of just a baseball, softball period. I'm sure there's going to be some transfer stuff in every sport because there always is. But I'm ready to get out on the boat, man. I'm ready to go
Yeah.
fishing. I'm ready to go to the beach. I'm ready to get a tan. Like, I don't know about you,
I'm,
Alex. Where are you
I'm
at?
just glad the warm weather is finally here for good. We had those little times there, like maybe even the beginning of this month where it was cold, then it was warm, then it was cold, but seems like we're in the clear now from warmer weather, which is nice.
Yeah, I mean, with my yard, I put all the fertilizer down. I put all the grass seed down a couple of weeks ago. Just let it grow, grow, grow. And today was the first day, probably since October, that I've mowed the grass. And it took an hour and a half, and normally it takes 30 minutes because I let the backyard get a little crazy. But it's that time of year. We're excited for everyone to be here tonight. We started a minute early too, Alex. Way to go, us.
How about that?
Yeah. And tonight on the show, obviously, we're going to talk baseball. We're going to talk softball. Siri, I'm not talking to you. So we're going to talk baseball. We're going to talk softball, men's and women's basketball. A lot of stuff's going on there. And then football, a little bit of spring fallout. We talked about the spring game. We're not going to go in detail there. That's been well covered. But we are going to take a look at where we see the depth chart, who we see contributing this year based on what we've heard so far through spring ball and what we're looking for in fall practice. And we'll have so much more content coming with fall practice because there's going to be a million more things that we're going to hear between now and then, between workouts, who's putting the extra work in the summer, who's transformed their body, who's showing out in the fall, who made that leap. So this is not by any means, when we start talking about depth chart, the final depth chart. And I do not want Shane to come yell at me about it. And I don't think Shane would. I like Shane. But anyway, before we get into the show, a cool moment today for folks in Florence, South Carolina. Lenore Sellers came back to South Florence, and he's probably still there taking pictures and signing autographs. But I think tonight at 6:00, they had a meet and greet where he came back to his hometown, and he actually donated $16,000 to the South Florence football program. And 16, that was his high school number. Obviously, big deal to him, but $16,000. And unfortunately, I was not able to get to the event tonight, had other things going on. But he just mentioned how he wanted to give back to the brotherhood at South Florence. He appreciated his time there, and he just wanted to give back. And he talked a little bit about NIL, which I think, for me, Alex, it makes me feel good. He said, look, it's nice that we get paid. It's not the reason I play football. Did you catch any of those quotes today, Alex?
I didn't see those, but to kind of go on that point, this story here is one of the better impacts you see of NIL these days is guys like Lenore Sellers or whoever are able to give back to the community or give back to their school. And I think this is just another example of the good things that do come with NIL.
Yeah, and Lenore's talked about we're making money, and I've had a couple splurge purchases. He said that he has a Gucci wallet. He's got some basketball shoes or some tennis shoes, a couple things. But he said, look, this money right now is for my future. Like, I need to keep living the way that I live. And in the article, it actually talked about Lenore's going to Nick Imawari's draft party wearing sweats and Birkenstocks. So it's not like he's grilled out and chained up and all of that kind of stuff. He's being smart with it. So I appreciate that. Alex, the NFL draft, pretty big weekend for Gamecock football, especially on the defensive side of the ball. You had Nick, TJ, Demetrius, Tonka, and Kyle all getting drafted in the top 4 rounds. After that, Josh, Bam, Raheem, Alex, and Torricelli signed undrafted free agent deals. There may be more since then that I haven't paid attention to. And then Vershawn and Gilbert got invited to rookie camps and see if they can find a way. But that's what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 Gamecocks are going to have an opportunity to make an NFL roster next year. What do you think about that, Alex? What do you make of it?
Yeah, it really showed just how good that defense was with some of these draft picks, and then the opportunities some of these guys got as undrafted free agents. But having three go in the second round, there was, I mean, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, that's huge for recruiting. Huge for not only high school recruiting but transfer portal recruiting, and just shows that defense was good. And it does show that there's a little bit to replace, but I think we've covered pretty well that we feel pretty good about South Carolina being able to at least attempt to replace some of those guys. But I thought it was a good weekend for South Carolina from an NFL draft standpoint. I kind of thought they may get close to tying the record, maybe beating it for draft picks. But, I kind of thought maybe Josh Simon would get in there, maybe Torricelli Simpkins, maybe a Donald Fortune. But it didn't happen. But nonetheless, they're going to get their opportunities there in camps.
Yeah, and look, 97% of college athletes are going to go pro in something other than the sport they play. It's great to have 12 out of 105 guys on a roster, a little over 10% having the opportunity to go play pro year after year. So happy for those guys. But Alex, we have a lot to talk about tonight, but I did want to talk about that off the top. Spend on it tonight, folks. So if you have any questions, let us know, and maybe we'll get back around to it at the end. But Alex, how about you go ahead and roll that intro, and we'll get right into the rest of the show.
Welcome to the Late Night Gamecock Show from Chief Sports, South Carolina. Here are your hosts, Matt Anderson and Alex Jones of thebigspur.com.
Welcome back into the show. Let's get down to the nitty gritty here, Alex. Baseball and softball. I think we should start with softball. Softball won last night, dropped 2 out of 3 over the weekend. Not what they were looking for, but the RPI is still in a good spot. They're still playing in the best conference in the country, and they have a big opportunity against Alabama this weekend. So, Alex, takeaways from softball this weekend.
Yeah, that series may have hurt their national seed chances just a little bit, just because Auburn wasn't having the best season. But it's one. It felt like it was just one of those series where things didn't go their way. South Carolina had that lead in that first game, then you had the rain delay, and just can kind of be tough to come out of there, especially as a visiting team in a rain delay and get things going back. But you had to find a way to salvage that Sunday game or that third game, and they found a way to do that. And now you got the midweek out of the way. You beat Furman yesterday, and now you got this one last series to kind of, maybe put a stamp on the resume a little bit. You obviously still have the SEC tournament as well with just how tough the SEC is. You can go and, rack up SEC wins and continue to boost that resume, but, still feel good about their chances of hosting a regional and, see what they can do against Alabama. That'll be another good series win if they can get it, and then find a way to, get some wins in Athens in the SEC tournament. And who knows, maybe you can work your way up back into feeling pretty good about potentially having a super regional.
Yeah, and I can't say enough about Ashley Chastain Woodard and what she's done. I don't think anybody expected the Gamecocks to be in the situation they're in right now. I mean, they're a virtual lock to host a regional. Yeah. And with everything that the athletic department's going to pull in resource-wise, they're going to have a leg up on potential national seed or at least hosting a super regional. I think that, you take care of business against Alabama. Obviously, a sweep would be fantastic. 2 out of 3 is not bad. And then you go in the SEC tournament, have a good showing, and you're right there. You're right there in the conversation. And I've been nothing but impressed with this softball team. So they'll play tomorrow night. I encourage everybody to watch it if you have the opportunity, and root these girls on, because something special is brewing in South Carolina, and I think it's only the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk every week about the job that Ashley Chastain Woodard's done with this program, and they're still in a really great spot. I mean, despite having a tough weekend, they're still in a really good spot to make it a run for the College World Series. So still feel really good about their chances to make some noise in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, and pitching and defense matters, and South Carolina is pretty daggum good at both of those metrics. Baseball, I feel like it's rinse and repeat, Alex. Over the weekend, the Gamecocks dropped 2 out of 3 on the road against Kentucky. Kind of a weird weekend with the Friday game getting postponed, having a doubleheader on Saturday. Had their opportunities, I feel like, Saturday in game 1, didn't capitalize. Did capitalize in game 2. hat tip to Will Tippett. Very excited for Will in that moment that he was able to have in that game. I love Will to death. He's a great kid and a true Gamecock. And then the second game of the doubleheader, Alex, they battled back. I mean, I guess that'd be Sunday. So not the second game of the doubleheader, but Sunday they battled back and got it within 1 or 2 runs again. And then 7th, 8th, 9th inning reared its ugly head. Any takeaways from your end there, Alex?
Yeah, the Sunday games, like it's obviously South Carolina's had their own struggles in all 3 games, but really they're just haven't been able to put it together in those Sunday games when they've had opportunities to either win a series or salvage a series. And we've talked about that Oklahoma game and some others, but kind of the same thing. They've had their opportunities and they haven't been able to capitalize. And now you get the win last night against Charleston Southern, but you're battling some injuries. Like it doesn't sound great on the news on Ethan Petrie. It's a sprain or strain at the AC joint in his left shoulder. And Paul Maneri last night says a 2 to 4 week thing. And, it could be a season ender for him just with, how much is left in the season. And so and then Nathan Hall obviously didn't play last night as well. And kind of sounds like maybe just a rest thing with him still battling that heel injury. And, Paul Maneri kind of talked about how, saw him limping a little bit in that Sunday game in Kentucky, just playing on a hard surface, artificial turf surface. As you can imagine, would wear on the heel a little bit. But, you got to hope to get him back for Friday against Florida in this series because that's your 2 top offensive threats, really. And without those guys, it can really be a struggle offensively for South Carolina.
Yeah, it's really heartbreaking for me for Ethan Petrie because he is a guy that had a lot of opportunities to go somewhere else in the offseason, stuck with the Gamecocks, stuck with Paul Maneri, stuck on 10 home runs on the season. He had a very good opportunity to break the all-time home run record at South Carolina. Looks like if he's out for the year and likely a high draft pick that might not come to fruition. But we'll see if he comes back. And look, I'm not holding my breath that Ethan Petrie forgoes Major League Baseball opportunities and comes back to South Carolina, but absolutely hate that for Ethan. With Nathan Hall, the kid's just been a warrior, given everything he's had to this team. I wish that there was some more, not just run support, but just batters in the lineup to protect those guys. Because, Nathan's going out there at the top of the lineup most nights and having to manufacture for himself. And then if Nathan doesn't get on base, then Ethan's trying to manufacture for himself. And there's not a lot of protection. So it's been disappointing in a lot of ways there this season. As Alex mentioned, Gamecocks do have Florida coming up. Florida has had a disappointing season as well. The game is at Founders Park. Looking forward to it. I think that anytime you get the opportunity to watch Gamecock baseball, take it all in. Any predictions for the weekend, Alex, with baseball?
Yeah, Florida got off to a really tough start SEC play, but as they normally do under Kevin O'Sullivan, they're starting to play better, and just kind of feels like it could be another one of those series where South kind of finds a way to get one either in that Friday, Saturday game, and then ultimately falls on Sunday. So I could see it just being another 2 out of 3 weekend for South Carolina.
Yeah, it's a
1 out of 3 weekend.
Yeah, it's a 1 out of 3, 0-3 weekend that I'm looking at right now. Just with the injuries, and there's no reason to push Nathan Hall to play. I mean, he's worked his way into a high draft pick in his own right. Probably a top 10 round guy. And you just don't want to have a recurring injury. I don't know the extent of it, but if you're looking at definitely not having Ethan Hall or Ethan Petrie and then not having potentially Nathan Hall, it just looks pretty dire. If there's any silver lining on the season, Alex, outside of Clemson, they've won every single non-conference game and had their cracks at it. It's a lot like men's basketball this past year and having your cracks at it and not be able to close the deal or letting something slip through your fingers. And it's tough because, look, football fans were on cloud 9 until the bowl game. And now, like, basketball coming off an NCAA tournament and just falling flat on your face. And we'll talk about basketball here in a little bit. And then baseball, the one thing that Gamecocks can hang their hat on has just been heartbreaking. How they won the Carolina Cup against Clemson, I'm really not sure at this point, but they did again. Every other sport's doing well.
Yeah, it's just with the baseball team. I think you kind of hoped, the Clemson series to be a little bit of a wake up call, and I think they kind of had their moments and chances, and early in the season, we've talked about that Oklahoma Game 3 game, and kind of feels like that may have been the turning point of the season. Really, obviously they had their own issues going into that series, but they had to have that Oklahoma series to gain any momentum, and we'll see what they can do to close out the season. But Florida's, as we mentioned, really good. They're playing better, and see what they can do, and with these last few weekends.
Yeah, and Coach Lake says it all the time. The season's not over till it's over. And who knows? SEC teams might say, hey, we're going to get ready for the postseason. And South Carolina gets hot at the right time, gets Ethan Petrie back, Nathan Hall back. The pitchers finally put together a week, and we'll see what happens. But moving on to women's basketball, obviously signed a coat, the big girl from Mississippi State. And I don't mean big in that way. I mean 6'5". Exactly what Dawn Staley needs. I think we've talked about that in the past, but I think that the big thing right now is Gamecocks are going to be number one in pretty much every poll. Connecticut might be number one in some polls. They got a big transfer today in a 6'4" girl. So Gamecocks and UConn, tale as old as time, probably going to be 1-2, however you want to put them. But we got to talk about Malaysia Fulwiley going to LSU. That news kind of became official. Interesting to me, Alex, and maybe we leave it at interesting. Maybe we take it further.
Yeah, it seemed like, the news started to come out not long after she entered the portal that's kind of a destination that could happen, and that's what ultimately where she ended up. And it's going to make for some interesting battles in the SEC. I think that game next year will be in Baton Rouge. So, I mean, we'll make for some interesting matchups just being, that dynamic now. But, it's interesting to see, how she kind of fits into that Kim Mulkey system and what she can do at LSU with, some of the other players around her as well.
Yeah, I'm interested to watch it unfold. LSU is not going to be a pushover, but if there's one thing that Dawn Staley she can hang her hat on 25 different credentials, but LSU has not been a problem for South Carolina women's basketball here lately. Moving on to men's basketball, Alex, got some latest additions. First, I want to talk about the freshman they're bringing in. I think it's Abdu Jr. I can't remember how you pronounce that.
Yarma.
Yeah, Yarma. I watched his highlights, Alex. 6'7", 185 pounds, 175 pounds. Mentioned it on a couple of shows I was on today. This past year at OTE, averaged 13 points a game on 11 shot attempts. Can shoot the ball. Looks to have a decent handle, probably a project, but he can also jump out the gym. And him, Eli, and Hayden have been on the same team for a while now. So your takeaway on adding him, I saw some discourse about it.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is, like, when you look at him, he kind of fits what Lamont Paris is looking for at that position, like a guy that can kind of stretch the floor and pretty good shooter, as you mentioned. And so I think, a guy that, maybe next year you're not seeing a whole lot of, a guy that can take that development, red shirt potentially, and we'll see what he can do in the preseason and to get ready for the season. But, it was an interesting pickup that I thought it was, kind of just fell right into their hands with, not going to High Point for him, but it could end up being in the long run a nice piece that they were able to get, especially because, as you mentioned, the chemistry he already has with some of the other guys on the team.
And look, I said it today on a couple of shows. I'm going to say it again because this is our show, and I always want our voices to be on our show as well. And look, if he had gone to High Point and been a 10-point per game guy, 12-point per game guy as a freshman, who knows? He was a 13-point per game guy at OTE. Now, is OTE and High Point similar competition? I'd say High Point's a little tougher. Night in, night out, better coaches, better scouting reports, all of that. But if he was a double-digit scorer at High Point, he would be a much more expensive player next year if South Carolina wanted to recruit him. So it's a numbers game now. It really is. And if you can take a kid and I don't want to say hide him on the end of your bench, but yeah, hide him on the end of your bench where nobody's going to come in and say, hey, here's $200,000. Here's $250,000. Here's $3. That's a good thing because you can kind of hold that market in place. And look, that is something I never thought I would say about college basketball or college football, but it is a thing now. And this is run like a business. And if I have somebody that I can hide in the background and coach up and teach, I'm going to pay them not that much money to do it for a greater reward later. You do it. But I'm not saying all of that's 100% what happened with Abu. I'm just saying that's a more general conversation. Then the other news was Norden Kapik. I think that's how you pronounce it, or Kapik, or Kapik.
I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, we'll know by the time we got to talk about him again. But I looked at him, Alex, and 15-8 against Michigan in the NCAA tournament, the highest level of competition. 10-5 guy for UC Riverside, I guess it was, or San Diego, I can't remember. But top 500 in defensive rebounding percentage, according to KenPom. Top 500 in free throw rate, according to KenPom. Offensive efficiency rating over 100. Really good player. And I've seen this different places, Alex, and I don't want to get too nerdy into the numbers because I can do that sometimes. Like, I can be a nerd. But Alex, how many college basketball players were scholarship players in the SEC last year? Just give or take.
I don't even. What's the number?
Okay, so there were 224 scholarship players in the SEC last year. Okay, so when I say top 500, people sit there and say top 500. Like, only 60 players get drafted in the NBA. Well, there's 244 players in the SEC.
Yeah.
And this guy was top 500 in the country. And that's pretty daggum good. That's like the highest percentile. So I'm looking at this, and look, Michi, top 355. He was 355th in assist rate in the country both years at South Carolina. Higher one year, but at least 355th best in the country. Always over 20% assist rate. And not to get too nerdy, but assist rate just means how many baskets did your team make while you were on the court that you assisted for? And over 20% is an elite point guard. So we went there and talked about, or at least an elite facilitator. We went back and we said, whoa, Michi at point guard, like, this might not work. What are the coaches thinking? And I keep digging into the numbers and digging into the metrics and saying, well, who's to say if Talon didn't come to South Carolina, he wouldn't have been a 30%. I mean, even with Talon, he was over 20%. So I see these puzzle pieces fitting together is, I guess, where I'm going with it.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was going to mention. One with Nordic, but really with the whole transfer class as a whole, as it stands right now, you can see they kind of went back to finding guys that fit what they want to do. And I think they, kind of tried to do that last year, but maybe tried to get more athletic, bringing in a Nick Pringle who's add some more athleticism to the paint. But when you looked at what they brought in 2 years ago for the NCAA tournament team, BJ Mack really fit what Lamont Paris want to do. And with BJ Mack, I think you can see a little bit of Norden, or a little bit of BJ Mack in Norden or K-Pick, because I think, you see just from the size, I think he's 6'8", 245 pounds, and guy that can really kind of do some pick and pop stuff, has a little bit of a 3-point ability, like shot 30.7%, but I think he's probably a little bit better shooter overall than that. But so I think with him, and then having a 5.2 rebounds per game, and as you mentioned, in the biggest moments against the best teams, played really well against Michigan. And so I think he's another one that really fits what Lamont Paris and the staff want in that system. And, kind of going to your Michi Johnson point as well, like, obviously he played a lot of point his first year at South Carolina, but when you look at it, there wasn't too much weapon-wise around him, because when you had G.G. Jackson, who was still trying to figure things out, and I kind of wonder as well. He did play a little bit of point last year for South Carolina, or 2 years on the NCAA tournament team for South Carolina. Obviously, Talon was the main point guard, but I think I'm still interested to see how that fully turns out if it does go the way that Michi Johnson is the primary point guard and does a lot of the point guard ability. But I think he has the ability to do a good enough job there, because when you watch him play, he's got that quick first step that he can drive past his man and have defenders flow to him. You can kick out to a Norden who, as we talked about, has a pretty decent 3-point shot, and some of these other guys, Kobe Knox or whoever it's going to be. And so I think you're just starting to see the Lamont Paris, and obviously they got one more spot left, but you're really starting to see them kind of get back to what they were doing when he got to South Carolina, and then with that NCAA tournament team of kind of just finding guys who just have maybe a high IQ basketball type of players, and not to say the guys that this past year weren't, but just kind of getting back to what they're looking for and guys that fit their system.
And look, the other thing too is Cam Scott coming back. I don't want to gloss over that. Cam Scott entered the transfer portal, came back. Nothing wrong with that in my eyes. Like if you're a Columbia kid and you look at other options and you still think that Columbia is the best place for you despite last season, and Cam showed flashes, I think that, and I said it when Cam went to the portal, I'd hoped the Gamecocks could have been able to keep him, and it turns out they were able to, and I'm excited for that opportunity as well for Cam. And I think this team, and I said it today, if this team can shoot 36% as a team from the 3-point line and average less than 12 turnovers per game, they're going to be in the NCAA tournament. Like that, those are the two metrics that I'm looking at right now. I don't even care about rebounding. I really don't, because if you don't turn the ball over and you can hit threes, that is the great equalizer in basketball. If you can turn other teams over, you're going to get the bunnies. You're going to get the fast break points. So,
and obviously we'll talk more about once we get close to the season, about just what the team's going to look like overall. But I think the biggest thing is just continue once preseason practice starts, like getting into Lamont Paris's defensive system, and because we know what these guys can do for the most part from a shooting standpoint or a back to the basket type standpoint. But now I think the big step for those guys is getting together as one from a defensive standpoint, because they kind of overall struggled with that this past season. Defensively was a little bit of struggle overall, and I think that's a huge key for this team next year, and to see kind of what they can do defensively and get back to 2 years ago.
And I think they can. They have a lot of length there. They have a lot. I'm not going to say athleticism. I'm not going to say a lot of athleticism, but they have a lot of length. I mean, there's only 3 guys on the team under 6'5" or under. And look, next year they're going to be replacing at least 5 up to 6 players from this roster again. So just buckle in and get used to it. You got to hope that these freshmen come along. But one thing that I don't know if it's been talked about enough, and I'm going to bring it up now, and I'm not going to elaborate on it. I mean, you can say what you want on it, Alex, but having a guy like Eli Ellis on your team in a transfer portal and NIL era, someone that everybody knows, everybody respects, he's earned his stripes. It might not pay off coming in as a true freshman, but if he comes in and buys in and does everything that he said he wants to do, that might have a payoff next year. And like, just don't you dare count out Lamont Paris. I'm just telling you right now, the guy did the best coaching job I've seen in a long time this past season, and even better than he did 2 years ago. So excited for this team. Let's see if they can make the NCAA tournament. But Alex, with that, let's go ahead and let's hit our sponsor break, and then we got to get into spring football fallout and maybe a little bit of recruiting. We'll see.
Mike here for one of the better dining options in the capital city. When I first moved there, I asked people around the radio station, where are the best wings? Well, the consensus was D's Wings. That was then. Today, they still have the best wings, but it's so much more now in their new location at 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia. Yeah, they get voted the best wings on a routine basis. Yes, they get voted the best sports bar on a routine basis, but they're not just about wings, and really, they're not just a sports bar. It is a family-run local restaurant and bar with 20 TVs and 25 beers on tap. And how about these daily specials? Every Monday night at D's, you've got 75-cent wings from 4 until closing. Tacos on Tuesday. Then on Wednesday, 18 wings and a pitcher of beer for $29. You've also got ribs and oyster bucket specials on Thursday. And no matter how big the party is, 20 or more, no problem. Just call ahead of time and they'll take terrific care of you. They'll do takeout as well. And guess what? A human will answer the phone and take the order. Billy and his staff do an outstanding job. Check out D's 415 Meeting Street in West Columbia.
Well, we are back, and we are so happy to be here tonight on April 30th, 2025, the last day of April. D's Wings, man, I'm trying to be on a diet. I'm trying to exercise more, and that commercial, man, it makes me want to drive in the car, and I say it every single time.
When they're on Monday, was that Monday night, I think, and it was awesome as always. You can't ever go wrong with D's Wings.
I was actually in Columbia Monday night for a work thing, and then Tuesday all day. And I got out about 4 o'clock, and I actually thought about calling you and be like, Alex, don't know what you're doing. You want to get an early dinner, but they fed us so well. This work thing I was at, I was just stuffed. And I just wanted to get home before I fell asleep driving on the interstate. So, well, Alex, there's not a whole lot of recruiting going on. We'll hit on more of it later, but South Carolina did land a big transfer portal defensive tackle yesterday. Defensive tackle, big position of need. Just elaborate on what they got, what they are expecting from this player, and what his potential is.
Yeah, Troy Pikes, the Georgia Southern transfer guy, is going to come in with 3 years of eligibility for South Carolina. And, we talked about it a lot on here and every other show. That defensive tackle was a spot they had to attack in the spring transfer portal just from a numbers standpoint. And they're able to do just that with Troy Pikes. And he was the guy who South Carolina had in for a visit over the weekend. The guy that really, South Carolina was after him, but Georgia and Ohio State were also after him. And he also visited Georgia Tech as well. But he's one that I could see him coming in and making an impact. He's going to obviously have to adjust, coming, getting ready for preseason practice and the off season and all that. But guy that when you look at the from a depth standpoint, a guy that could make an impact for this team next year. And just a spot that they had to add one transfer from a numbers standpoint. And I know we're going to get into more position by position group a little bit later, but I think it's going to end up being a really good pickup, not only for this season, but having those 3 years where, so far under Travion Robinson, we've seen how he can develop defensive tackles. You look at this past draft with Tonka Hemingway and TJ Sanders going in the draft. And so I think he's going to be a guy that, could make a pretty good impact this year, but really excited to see, how he continues to develop down the road.
Alex, do you have any idea how many scholarships are open right now? I know we have one in men's basketball. Are there any open right now on the football side? I know we've had some recent transfers.
I'm not 100% sure. I need to look back to see.
And you don't have to do it right now, but I do think that, well, the transfer portal is closed for kids to enter now, right? So, like, whoever's on the team is on the team right now. There might be some people that are still in the transfer portal that Gamecocks could sign, could bring in. Don't know about that, but so right now the team is kind of the team, and there's still some kids that have to come in that were either transfers or I don't want to say late enrollees. It kind of sounds terrible now when you say a freshman coming in the summer is late, but not an early enrollee, even though the Gamecocks had a bunch of those. So, Alex, I'm going to lead this, and I'm going to kind of just let's go through the roster, and then let's make it too deep here in a little bit. I'm going to give you the players that I think Gamecock fans need to be paying attention to at each position group, and you tell me if I miss anybody, and we'll go from there. Does that sound cool?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, so QB1, we all know that's Lenore Sellers. Aaron Noland and Cutter Woods are battling to be the backup. It's hard because I think most people said Aaron Noland has a year of college experience, but they're both coming into a new system at the exact same time. So I don't know who has a leg up or what's going to happen there, but your thoughts.
And don't count out Luke Doty as well. I don't know. I know we're going to get into the depth chart projection or whatever, but maybe Luke Doty is that quarterback too right now, just because of the experience factor. He's, been at South Carolina for, a long time and knows the system. So maybe they give that to him, the QB2, just because of the experience. But, I think we all saw what Cutter Woods is capable of in the spring game. And he had a really good first spring at South Carolina. And I think that's one thing that's, I've heard about him, which is how quickly he's picked up the offense. So you could see it being him, but Aaron Noland's also got, I think, a really high ceiling as well. And so that's an interesting quarterback two battle. That's going to, I think, kind of go into really maybe even lead up to week one to see who they're going to battle out.
And look, Lenore Sellers is popping up all over mock drafts in round one. Yeah. So this is a competition that Gamecock fans hope that Lenore is back next year, 2 years from now, I guess, to play his redshirt junior season. But looks like Aaron Cutter and are going to be battling for years to come. And moving on to running back, you have Fajon, Attaway, Howard, and then you have Fuller. I don't know if there's another guy in that room that we need to really talk about right now. I think Fajon, if he gets his year to play, is probably going to be the starter. But I think you can throw Howard, Attaway, and Fuller in a jar and just pull one out. And kind of like what we talked about last year with the wide receiver, to be honest.
Yeah, really. Yeah, I'd agree with that. If, I would put Faison as running back one, but yeah, I think, don't count out Oscar Attaway as well. I mean, he kind of showed a little bit of what he's capable of in the bowl game against Illinois, but at the very least, I think he can be a very solid, backup running back. But, I thought Jawarn Howell also showed some things last year, and I thought, at times flashed and kind of showed his athleticism and his quickness, and he had some nice moments in the bowl game as well. And then Matthew Fuller, I think, continued to get better as spring practice went on, and I think kind of ended up being one of the players that was standing out. I thought he looked pretty good in the spring game as well. So I think from a just kind of overall numbers standpoint, I think the room's at a pretty good spot, and got 4 high level players that can go in there and they would trust right now.
Yeah, and that's a huge thing. There's been years when Gamecocks only had 1 or 2, and tight end. Go ahead.
I was going to say you got to have 3 or more at least in the SEC, and really in college football, just because that's a position that gets so banged up. But I think they like where they are number-wise standpoint right now.
I think so too. You look at tight end, Smith, Brady Hunt, Dingle. I think Smith probably has the upper hand on the starting spot, considering he started 7 games last year as a true freshman. Dingle has SEC experience. I still like Brady Hunt a lot. Let's not forget that touchdown that got called back on the trick play that Brady Hunt was able to wrangle in the back of the end zone. I think tight end's looking pretty good. I don't know if there's anybody outside of those 3 we need to talk about.
Maybe Maurice Brown. I'd keep an eye on him. He's a guy who makes a lot of impact on special teams, and guy just physically continues to get better and better, and looks like he could be a guy that's relied on. It. They've kind of brought him in at some points just as a blocking tight end, but maybe keep an eye on him as well. But with Michael Smith, obviously he didn't participate in spring practice, but I think that would have been one where you would have liked for him to have that spring practice to build on what he was able to do year one. But at the same time, he's been in the system for a whole year. He was an impact player last year, a guy that played a lot. So I don't think you worry too much from for him having to catch up because he knows what's expected. But would have liked to see him continue to build on that. But we'll see. I think he'll be good to go in the summer and offseason workouts and preseason practice. But Dingle, as you mentioned, SEC experience guy that at Kentucky. They had some quarterback issues last year, but he was a guy who I think had around 200 so yards the year before. So a guy that I think could come in and kind of fill in a little bit of that Josh Simon role to a bit. And then Brady Hunt's an interesting one. You mentioned that you're really excited about him, and he's a guy that they kind of more of a blocking tight end last year, but I think they're kind of hoping that he takes that next step and being a guy that could be a threat in the passing game. And you saw that a little bit. He made that big catch on 3rd down against Missouri that kind of started that last drive going down the field. So I kind of I like this tight end room overall, and think and again, don't count out Maurice Brown because I think they really like him and he continues to come along.
Yeah, Hunt's a guy that falls forward, and then you have Mike Tyler. I think I'm getting that name right. Freshman. I think that coming from the type of football he played in high school and his athletic metrics and measurables, it'd be great to redshirt him, and that'd be fantastic. Let's move to offensive line. Josiah Thompson, Big Tree, Trovon. I don't know if we really need to talk too much about those guys. They're kind of proven commodities. Marquis Anderson, we'd love to see him take that step and be healthy. Boaz Stanley, looks like he's firmly entrenched as the center. Behind him, maybe Newsome is challenging him. You got Sharp as another transfer, maybe going to play some guard. Right tackle Kaysen Henry. Behind him, I don't really know. Shed Surratt has looked good. Cam Pringle has left the program. I don't know, Alex, just offensive line, like some names that, if I mentioned them, don't worry about it. But did anybody I miss that needs to be talked about?
I think a few guys that just had some solid spring practice. Shed Surratt, the freshman offensive lineman, I think he had a really good spring practice, and a guy that's, I think, maybe he makes some type of impact this season, but a guy that down the road they really like as well. And Jatavius Shivers, he's a guy that, now I can't remember if you mentioned him just now, but a guy that, when he came in at that right tackle spot for Kaysen Henry in the Alabama game, I thought he had some really good moments and really good plays in that game. And I think he's one too that they kind of really like in that 2D potentially, and being a guy that can come in and those tackle spots. And he also played a little bit of kind of a blocking tight end last year, late in the season when they were battling some injuries at the position. But that's a few guys that I think are that we kind of mentioned or that expected to make an impact this year. Got Rodney Newsome, as you mentioned, kind of maybe work as a backup center. Marquis Anderson, I think it's kind of interesting that he's also getting a little bit of work at center. But we'll see kind of what this offensive line. I think just the big key for them is take that next step in offseason and the preseason practice to be ready to go game one, because you got I think they have a chance in those first 5 games. I know we'll get into more of a schedule breakdown soon, but I think they have an opportunity there to get off to a really fast start in the beginning of the season.
Yeah, I agree. And moving on to wide receiver, I think there's 9 to really circle. I'm going to list them out. If I miss somebody, tell me. Nick Harbor, Jason Brown, Mazio, Malik Clark, Brian Rowe, Donovan Murph, who's not on campus yet, but just watch out, boys and girls. Van Dravis, Dre Jacobs, Jordan Gidron, and Lex Cyrus. I think those are the 9 right now. Did I miss anybody? That's Luke Doty's not in that room really anymore. Did I miss anybody?
Yeah, I think like that's the guys are circling. You mentioned Donovan Murph. That really, I mean, just because he wasn't in for spring practice doesn't mean that guy won't make an impact this year. I think he'd be one that he can come in right away and pick up where those guys in the spring are. But those guys that were those freshman receivers that were here in the spring do have a little bit of a leg up, just having a whole spring practice under their belt of learning the system. But I think Donovan Murph's just so athletically gifted that he can come in and find a way to make an impact right away. And I think just having those returners come back, I think they are ready to take the next step as well. Mazio Bennett, we kind of saw the flashes he had last year, and Nick Carver, we've talked a lot about what he needs to do in the next step and how he's been. But it's an interesting room that I think has to take a next step to help Lenora Stellars and the rest of that offense. But Mike Furry really did a fantastic job developing those guys last year, and I think you'd have to expect that they will take the next step.
And one of the things that I personally like, we're not going to get too much into special teams tonight. I'm really don't even plan to talk about it, Alex, just so you know. But Lex Cyrus and Jaden Sellers. Sellers is not a guy that I mentioned in the wide receiver room. I think he just needs to get bigger to play consistent snaps right now, but he is very quick, twitchy, very fast. Yeah. He's going to be I think he's going to be a really good player. But I will say I like kick returners and punt returners that play offense. I like that more than I like, and nothing to say against like Chris Culliver, who, came in as a wide receiver, moved to defense, kind of an athlete, set the record, I think, for SEC return yards. But I like having that Ace Sanders type back there to receive a punt. I think that you just see the field differently. You're used to carrying the ball. And so just keep an eye out for Lex Cyrus and Jaden Sellers there as maybe kickoff returners, punt returners. Look, Nick Harbor did it last year at kick return.
Throw Brian Rowe in there too. I could see him being the guy that could be either a punt or kick returner. Maybe not this year because they got Jalen Kilgore back there doing a lot of that, and Nick Harbor as well. But I think those 3 guys are really ones that could be impact guys in special teams moving forward.
I could see Gidron doing it as well.
Yeah,
he's a big kid and fast. When he breaks away, he has a chance.
Yeah.
So moving over to defense. I'm going to hit some high level here stuff, Alex, and we'll talk a lot about defense the rest of the year, but I want to make sure we get to the depth charts before we have to get out of here tonight.
Yeah.
Some no brainers. Dylan Stewart is a no brainer to me. Fred Johnson's a no brainer to me. DQ Smith is a no brainer to me. Vicari Swan's a no brainer to me. Judge Collier's a no brainer to me. Jalen Kilgore is a no brainer to me. Defensive tackle. Go ahead.
I said Brandon. I threw Brandon Cisse in there.
Yeah, Brandon Cisse is probably in there. Jalewis Solomon has an opportunity. I don't want to spend as much time we did on offense. Offense has more question marks than defense right now because the offense might have to carry the defense. But defensive tackle is still something I'm kind of worried about. You're looking at Brownlow Dindy, Troy Pikes, Markel Goodwine, and then Barrett there at defensive tackle. You got some kids coming in, some freshmen, some recruits. And Xavion Hardy, can he get there to be a defensive tackle? The kid they signed out of Georgia late, can't remember his name right now.
Christian Ingram.
What's that? Yeah. Ingram, is he going to make an impact? You never know. I mean, you go back and God, why am I blanking on this guy's name too? Kelsey Quarles. He had an opportunity to make an impact as the freshman. So you never count out the freshman, but defensive tackle is something I'm kind of looking at. Defensive end, Brian Thomas Jr., Jalen Brown, Jacius Gear, Dez has an opportunity. I mean, I think they have bodies there. Obviously, Demon Clowney, however you say it. And you brought in what's his name? Wilson. George Wynn's another guy associated with the program. But so, I mean, they have bodies there, and I don't know if they're necessarily done. And they have freshmen. I mean, Anthony Addison is making a lot of noise right now. So I'm not necessarily that worried about defense. I'm not worried about linebacker either. I think linebacker is in a good spot based on what South Carolina was able to do last year. I think that Okronkwo, however you say his name, is going to probably start. Then you have Jerron Willis, you have Sean Murphy back there. The way that the Gamecocks play defense with their linebackers, you only need 5, maybe 6 for depth and rotation. But Alex, since we're on defense, how about we go ahead and go through the depth chart here?
Yeah.
Let's just do starters. We're not going to do too deep. We'll get into that later in the summer when we hear more. But Alex, who are your starters at defensive end?
Yeah, right now I think I project obviously Dylan Stewart on one side, and I think I'd probably pencil in Brian Thomas Jr. to get the start over there on the other side.
Yeah, where we're in lockstep there. Defensive tackle, I have Brownlow Dindy and I have Troy Pikes just because I think Troy's played. I can see Goodwine or Barrett getting in there.
Yeah.
Do you have who are your 2 DTs? I guess let me ask that.
Yeah, I was going to go Brownlow Dindy and Monkel Goodwine. I could also see Nick Barrett and Monkel Goodwine being the starters. So there's a few different combinations I could go with, but that if I'll right now I'll go Brownlow Dindy and Monkel Goodwine.
All right, so a linebacker, Fred Johnson and Justin.
Yes, that's what I do. Yeah.
Okay, safety DQ. He's going to be back there.
Mm-hmm.
The other safety. This is one I really don't know.
Right now I'd go Peyton Williams.
Yeah, Peyton Williams is the guy that's on the tip of my tongue, but I wonder if CC goes over there. I wonder could Solomon go over there?
David Busey.
Yeah, David Busey. I mean, you got Kelvin Smith too, or Kelvin Hunter. Kelvin Hunter from you got those guys, and I haven't seen them that much. I can't say anything right now, and in the spring they're installing packages, and you don't really know where they're going to go. We'll hear more in the summer. So yeah, I mean, then defensive back, Vicari and Judge, I think are pretty much locked in, and then, I mean, do you think who do you think is more locked in?
Judge.
Yeah, same here. And then Vicari
or Brandon Cisse.
Yeah, and look, Vicari I think is going to be fine. He's going to come back, be with the team, all of that. It'll be an interesting competition.
Yeah, and really that other safety spot, nickel, and I know we haven't gotten to nickel. We'll get there in just a minute, but at the corner spot, there's so many different options they can go with. But you almost look at there's no option they could go wrong with, because there's so many different quality options there. You got the guys, those second-year guys, Jalewis Solomon, Kelvin Hunter, David Busey, who are coming along. Brandon Cisse may just end up being too good to keep off the field. And then obviously I'll just go ahead and jump to nickel. I have Jalen Kilgore at nickel because I think that they wanted to keep him there instead of moving to safety just because of how important that nickel position is and how well he played it last year. But what do they do if they get into obvious passing down situations? Do they maybe move a Kilgore back to that safety and bring in Vicari Swain or whoever's not that other corner? But I think secondary's got a chance to be really, really good this year for South Carolina.
Oh, I do too.
They just have it's really talented. Now, obviously, you're losing Nick Hemingway, who's a freak safety, a guy that was incredible last year for him. But I think overall, that secondary just got a chance to be really good because Judge. I mean, you've seen him in some of these mocks, those multi-round mocks. He's a projected 3rd-round pick. You got Cisse, who was really good at NC State, and DQ Smith. I think just continues. He's an experienced guy, but the secondary is really intriguing because I think, as we both have said here, it's got a chance to be really good this upcoming year.
And you didn't even talk about Miles Norwood,
Miles,
who had an interception in the spring game.
Yeah, he absolutely is going to factor into that other corner spot as well. It's just they got the starters at each of the spots, or whoever they decide with. You got a good feeling that they're going to be pretty good, but there's depth at each spot as well.
Yeah, if someone's not producing, there's somebody else that's chomping at the bit.
Right.
Quarterback, let's go ahead and just do this one. It's easy. Lenore Sellers. Running back, it's Fajon if he's clear. Tight end, Michael Smith. We already kind of talked about that. Josiah Thompson's going to do left tackle. Tree is probably going to be left guard, and I think that's going to make him a lot of money. You could swing him out to right tackle, I guess, if you needed to. But for right now, I think that it's going to be Big Tree at left guard. Bo Stanley at center, Trovon at right guard, and then Kason Henry at right tackle. But right tackle is the spot on the offensive line I'm really watching. I want to see who wins that battle. The coaches seem to like Kason. He's got to stay healthy. But Jatavius Shivers, I mean, Alex, you and I have texted about him a lot. He has an opportunity, and he is a guy that the Gamecocks stole from Vanderbilt, and I think he has a chance. So offensive line is probably deeper than it's been in a while, but it's until I see it with my own two eyes, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, they have some depth there, and obviously they had a few departures there with Kim Pringle and Ja'Kai Moore, which we'll see what they do from a number standpoint. Obviously, they're Nolan Hay, the transfer from Incarnate Words, visiting as well, and maybe that's another guy they can bring in just from a depth standpoint, because we've talked about it so much on here that you can really see that they're making an effort not to let what happened 2 years ago to the offensive line happen again. They're going to have depth at all those spots that if injuries happen to battle them, but to kind of go with that projection of what you had there for the starting five, like if it turns out that it is Josiah Thompson and Tree Bobolade on that left side, that's a really intriguing left side of the offensive line that's going to be big and physical, and so that's something that's really interesting. And Boaz Stanley, I think you can really kind of pencil in as that center right now. I think he's come in and kind of taking that spot, and he'll have to continue battling for it. But I think that of all the spots on the offensive line, I think you have to feel pretty good about him and Josiah Thompson. And really, I think you can throw Case and Henry in there as well. It's just those guard spots that could be interesting with throwing a Marquis Anderson in there as well to battle in for one of those guard spots.
Well, Alex, you talk about those guard spots, and it's not bad to have two freshman All-Americans competing for the two guard spots, right? Not a bad thing at all. Moving on to wide receiver, Alex, until I hear differently, and I don't want to discount the freshmen. I like the freshmen. I think that some of them might push. I'm going to go Nick Harbor, Jason Brown, and Mazio Bennett as the starters if they roll out three. And then after that, it is a bloodbath to get on the field. And that's exactly what Mike Furry wants and Shane wants, is they want these guys to be tremendous recruits, tremendous players, and have to earn it and go to the NFL because they earned it.
Yeah, I think you have to expect that at least one or two of those freshmen are going to make some type of impact this season. And I don't think we know who it's going to be yet. And obviously you still got Donovan Murphy coming in, as we mentioned, but I think you have to imagine, those guys are going to make some type of impact, or maybe, we'll see what they can do from a special team standpoint as well. But I think I agree with who you had as a potential starters. I think you kind of go with the older guys who are more experienced, but those freshmen, obviously they made a case in preseason practice, or in spring practice. But I think that having those guys in also help those return Mazio Bennett, Nick Harbor, and Jared Brown, help continue to push those guys as well to continue to get better. And I think they need Nick Harbor to take that big next step, and he's got it. You can see the light starting to come on near the end of the season, but take him to take that next step, and Jared Brown continue to become a just more polished overall receiver, and for Mazio Bennett to continue to show what he's capable of, because you saw the flashes there as well.
Yeah, I think I've been calling Jared Jason. I'm thinking about Jason Barnes, but Jared Brown. And look, and one thing I will say, the one thing that you can take from the spring game is all these freshmen look like they belonged that should have been high school seniors still. That's a big thing. And I'm not looking at numbers or who caught the most passes, but when their number was called, they all caught a ball, it seemed like. So, well, Alex, that was fun. This is my favorite time of the year because there's no games to have to deconstruct. There's nothing to commiserate about when it comes to football. Everything is possible. Anything's possible right now. And we'll continue to hear stuff. We'll do this again, maybe throughout the summer. If we're hearing something, say, hey, watch out for this guy. Probably not go in depth like we just did, but we wanted to make sure that we did that on this show coming out of spring, and going into fall, we'll do it again. Coming out of fall, we'll do it again. And before the season, Alex and I will have our 10 big predictions for the season and what's going to happen, breakout players, all that kind of stuff. So I'm super excited for that. But remember, softball tomorrow night, 3-game series, Alabama. Friday, 3-game baseball series against Florida. And the grind never stops on the Big Spur.
Nope.
If you're not on the BigSpur.com, make sure you check it out. I think Alex is I think your quota must have gone up a little bit, Alex. I think you did 30 articles last week. So, you were working overtime. But we look forward to interacting with y'all anyway. Y'all can interact with us, whether it's through the chat box, whether it's on the Big Spur, whether it's on our Twitters. We appreciate y'all so much. And when you spend this time with us, you give us the most valuable thing you have. And we'll never take that for granted. And we appreciate doing this. And Alex, we will be back next week with a whole nother hour of Gamecock topics to discuss and tear apart and give our thoughts and our conclusions and our predictions, and probably be wrong on half of it, but we'll be right on the other half.
Yeah, we should have a lot to talk about again. You mentioned softball. We'll be getting ready for the SEC tournament. Baseball will have another series under their belt, and then you never know, recruiting wise what could happen or whatever. But always busy around here.
Yeah, definitely is. Well, Alex, for you, for myself, I wish everyone a good night. Thank you for joining us for Late Night Gamecocks show, and we will talk to you soon. Have a great one, everyone. Bye.